Welcome to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is Kaye. She is the editor of Pyrene's Fountain and the Aeolian Harp series. Welcome, Ami.
Thank you so much.
I understand you've been writing since you were a small child. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience?
Well, I did start writing when I was fairly young. Both my parents were very interested in the arts. My mother, like a lot of other mothers, would read me stories before bedtime, and she read aloud from a lot of the classics. And my father was particularly interested in poetry, so he would read me Urdu poetry and works from British writers such as Alfred Lord Tennyson. So I think I picked up a lot of that early interest in literature, and I was a voracious reader. So because of my interest in reading, I became very interested in how writers think, their ideas, their philosophies, and just the beauty of words. I kind of just fell in love with words. And I started experimenting. I was very, very young when I wrote my first poem. And then I filled up over the years, I filled up notebooks of small short stories, poems, and I even wrote a one-act play that my school produced.
Wow,
So
what grade was that?
I
Just
think
wondering.
that was probably in 9th grade or something, yes.
Wow.
They were not very good.
No.
Because I was very young, and a lot of my work was imitative. So I was copying the ideas and the structures that other writers from the writers that I had read, and then slowly I developed my own interest and my own voice.
It has its own style, perhaps.
Yeah, so that happened. And then I kind of took a detour from the whole writing arena, and I went into the sciences, and I studied psychology, and I studied counseling and development, and that's where I took my graduate degree in counseling and development. But then when I was in my early 40s, I always had that urge and that longing to get back to writing. And I started writing again, and then I was submitting some work, and it got accepted. I was very excited. I said, oh, maybe, this is something that I can do professionally. So I started writing, and at the same time, while I was writing, I felt like I wanted to include other writers in what I was doing. So we started a journal, a poetry journal called Pyrene's Fountain. This was about 10 years ago. And we are now at our 19th issue that we're going to start.
Goodness.
And in the beginning, it was a small online venue, but the readership has grown and it's done tremendously well, exceeded our expectations. So we're very happy about that.
Is it a monthly?
It is actually yearly. It's an annual. We started off with 3 times a year, and it's a full service journal. So that's kind of what's been going on. And side by side, while I've been doing my publishing activities, I also try and do whatever writing I can.
I can see that from your training as a child, formulating those writing skills and ideas help you to develop as a writer.
Yes, I think that definitely does. And then the other thing is now, because of the internet, we're all blessed that we can sort of interact with other writers, editors, publishers, and get ideas from each other and share a lot of good information and share different kinds of ways to publish and ways to enjoy and share art.
Do you feel that the writing, you enjoy the writing as well as the company, right? The social aspect
I
of it,
absolutely love writing. It's very important to me. If I haven't written in a few days, I start feeling restless. I feel like I need to be writing.
And the reading, and they say every writer is a good reader.
Oh yes, I think you have to read a lot, really a lot of work before you can be a good writer. And I think it's a sort of a ongoing process. It's not like you just read and then you become this wonderful writer. I think it's a journey. You keep reading, then you write, then you understand where you can do better and what you can do better, and it's a learning experience. So I think for me, it's a matter of not just writing, but enjoying the process.
Yes.
And I really love that feeling of sitting down, relaxing, writing. I'm not so focused on how much I'm writing. To me, even if I just write one line, but it's a really good line,
Yes.
then I feel like if I'm doing it on a constant basis, then slowly, slowly over time, that line grows to a paragraph, the paragraphs grow to a chapter, and before you know it, you have a book.
Wow.
So it's a slow and very consuming kind of a process.
Well, you seem very patient with production of art, because some
I
people
think in
can.
this kind of a field you have to have some patience, especially when you're making books, because there's so many different elements to making a book that can go wrong, that you really want to take your time
Yes.
and do it the best you can do it.
And I have heard from other poets that it's so much reworking that we don't really think
Oh
about
yes,
a poem goes through.
a lot.
Do you find that the internet, being an online venue when you started, was really help with that format? You know, the fact that you could change your poem.
Sure, absolutely. A lot of I mean, it's much easier. Once something is in print, it's hard to really change it.
Yes.
But when you have online venues, you can always go back and edit things. And you're absolutely right. A lot of work, especially if you're looking at poetry, a poem is a small, concise form compared to, say, a novel.
Yes.
And when people look at it, they probably think, wow, this is so easy to write compared to something else. But there's a lot of thought that goes into a poem, and a poem, you're trying to say a lot in a little space.
Yes.
So it's a lot of thinking and a lot of reworking, and you're
Definitely.
trying to connect one thought to another, you're layering ideas. So yes, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes.
Yes, I always find writing short is harder. It's much
That's
harder
true.
than
That
writing
is
long.
true. That's true.
So, and you were publishing with online at first, right? Did you feel that it was? How did you feel about being readers being to comment on your poem and getting instant response? You know, and this
Yeah.
kind of experience writers never had before
That
the
is
internet.
true.
entered.
I think that actually certainly brings the writing world closer, the community. It's nice that you can write something and right away
There's
you
a
can
human
get
there, yeah.
responses. So you feel you're not working in a vacuum. You're kind of connected. And I think that sense of connection is something that all writers look for, and they enjoy that. And I personally feel very blessed to be in a community where everyone is so supportive and encouraging of the work that we do and of each other. So I
And
really
that's your
like.
writers group, or what community
Well,
are you
not
referring
really.
to?
It's not so much of a writers group. I think, we use Facebook, for example, a lot. And a lot of the writers are sort of have accounts on Facebook. So it's almost like, and everyone's connected through
Yes, that way.
Facebook. So someone posts something, and then right away there'll be some people who'll, make a comment. For us, it proves to be a very nice place to promote our books. So we put up like pictures of images of our book covers, and then so we can say, okay, so this book has been released, or it's going to be released soon. So that way people know, okay, this book is coming onto the market, and if they find the blurb interesting, or sometimes people like the cover, then they might be interested in reading it or reviewing it.
And
So-
sometimes it's nice to refer each other to maybe the right venue for the book,
Absolutely,
right? Because sometimes
absolutely.
it's self-published or smaller publishers.
That's true.
There's a whole different world,
Sure.
right?
There's a lot of ways to publish today. So authors these days have a lot of avenues to explore.
Yeah, and they have a lot of autonomy of how
Definitely,
they want to
definitely.
publish.
I mean, we are only able to publish like this because of the POD system, print on delivery. But the traditional publishing model would have been very difficult for us because that's far more expensive.
Yes, yes. And so the community, let's talk a little bit more about that community.
Sure.
And that community is, how about the Glenview community? How do you feel that?
Oh, I think Glenview is a lovely place, very supportive, again, of artists and authors. I think it's a wonderful place that sort of enjoys both the things, you know, like the quiet and peace of the suburban life, and yet we're so close to downtown Chicago that you just get into get to the train and you're there in 40 minutes, or you can drive, and there's so many wonderful cultural programs available in Chicago, and they have the Poetry Foundation. It's a thriving literary community down there. And here in Glenview, we have wonderful supportive programs. We have first of all, the Park District has so many programs. We have a fabulous library.
Yes.
The library has a lot of wonderful programs. I think they hold readings every so often. I don't know the schedule off the top of my head,
Right.
but they have a lot of things going on.
And I've seen programs about local photographers and local
Yes,
painters.
local
I think
artists.
You know some as well, right?
Yes, there's Elisa Bauner who
Yes.
paints
Vibrant
beautiful. I
colors,
mean, her
yeah.
work is just so vibrant. We actually did a feature on her in one of our Pyrenees Fountain
Really? Yeah.
episodes, because that particular issue was about art, how art and poetry are connected. And
Yes.
it was wonderful.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And speaking of wonderful motifs in poetry, can you tell us a little bit about what hands hold, what hands can hold?
Sure.
How do hands work in your poem?
Well,
poems?
I think, you know, I've always been fascinated by anthropology, first of all, and how humans are different from other species because they have the capability of using their hands to make tools in order to make other objects. So that's like an extra function.
Yes.
And how we use our hands in so many ways to cook food, to clean,
To
to
express
write, to
emotions,
express
right? Yeah.
ourselves in prayer, to express, tenderness towards a child or a loved one. So they're so integral to us as human beings, and such a great metaphor that I feel they're perfect for poetry. And I went back to a lot of my earlier poems that I wrote when I was younger, some of them when I was in school, in college. And I saw that I had used or referred to hands in different ways. So I said, well, maybe I can put this together and make a book. And that's what I did.
That's very interesting because you didn't start with a motif.
No,
But you had
no,
to-
it kind of
it took
came, yeah.
retrospection
Exactly.
and reflection to learn about yourself.
Exactly.
Something that was not,
Right, right.
yeah, wasn't blatant to you, right? And that's very interesting. And can you tell us a little bit about other thematic things? Like, is blue door something that you like? Color blue, is it?
Well,
something-
actually, the door, the whole idea of the doors came because my husband is a very good photographer.
Yeah.
And he likes
Visual.
we like to travel
Yeah,
a lot.
artist.
And every place that he goes, he photographs different doors.
Oh, that's
He's
interesting.
fascinated by doors. And I'm fascinated from a different perspective. I think he looks at it in a more artistic photography kind of a way, and I'm looking at it in more a symbolic kind of way, how doors kind of lead you to another
Realm.
place, another realm, exactly. So I actually wrote a poem called Blue Door,
I see.
and that's how that one came about. And the most recent one that I'm working on is called Flute Songs of Tanjore. And that's a manuscript about music.
Can you read us a couple of
Sure.
poems from that?
Okay. So I'll start off with, this is from my music manuscript, and this is called Woodwinds. And when I wrote this poem, I tried to use words with a lot of vowels to give it that kind of flow
Musical sound.
that goes with the woodwinds and the whole philosophy of flow. Woodwinds. The swell of gravity collects a body of lightness within its ample lungs. The whir of a hummingbird sculpts the half-open blackness from trees that hug the earth's breast in their clutching roots. And through them, wind, always wind, and air, elements that burn and feed the fire, and flow between the rocks and clouds, growing from tiny breaths to full-blown sounds in sweet convergence. Rush of air, invisible sly, a floating lightness follows the trail of a lonely, haunting piping. The moving shape of air, its ability to flow, creating pitch when weaving in and out of tiny holes in reeds and hollow wood. Inhale, exhale, unraveling plates of sound, the winds reach a new existence. And on the way, they learn their names: piccolo, flute, oboe, clarinet, bassoon.
That's lovely. I
Thank you.
like how the instruments
Yeah, the different
receive
instruments.
their names from
Yeah.
this musical.
Yeah, from the nature
Yeah.
and from the wind
Inhale,
and air.
exhale of
Yeah,
the
exactly.
air. That's wonderful. And you have some musical background, or what? How do you see music playing
Well,
with poetry?
again, when I was growing up, my parents always had music on all the time, and I sort of grew up and I studied some music. I studied Indian classical music,
Wonderful.
and I studied the ragas, which is an ancient Indian classical form, which is very close to the Western scales. And each raga has their own particular characteristic, their own flavor. And I was very much fascinated by that. And then when I, was married and I had children, I used to have them listen to a lot of music. So both my sons grew up very musical, and they both played the piano, classical piano. And often when they were together, they would play on two pianos. So one of my sons played solo, the other son played the instrumental. And they played
Yes.
concertos together, such as Rachmaninoff and
That
Grieg.
takes a lot of cooperation.
Yes.
And concentration, right?
A lot. We had a fantastic music teacher. So
that's-
music played a huge
That
a huge part in our lives, and I think that's where a lot of the poetry comes from.
You hear it in the music.
Yeah,
right? You
I
hear
feel like
poetry in the music.
I feel like poetry and music are very akin, as are all the arts.
Yes.
Very, very much related to each other.
Well, actually, I think there are some musical instruments, Chinese musical instruments that came from India. So there's definitely very musical culture.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
Well, let's see. Is there another poem you'd like to share with us?
Sure.
I
I
think
actually-
you have a. Do you have like two that work together?
A diptych, yes, a set. These poems are about the process of writing.
Yes, that's
So-
what our audience would love to hear that.
So I have one that is about the pen,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is about paper. So it's kind of a
Even
set.
the process themselves,
Yeah,
it can be poetic.
exactly. So the pen is basically describes how the author feels while they are writing.
Together.
Yes, and the one on paper kind of describes the lure of the blank page to the author. Like when a writer sees a blank page, it's kind of like magic because there's nothing there.
It's inviting,
It's blank.
like a door.
Exactly. And then when you start writing, you have something on it. So the whole process of creation, I think, is very magical. So I'll start with pen.
Yes.
Inside this bone burns marrow fire, which cannot be extinguished, only spent. A shadow dizzied by tabula rasa wraps around the reticent voice. As fingers curl around the barrel, a swirling dance of lyrics crams the mind. From somewhere comes a shift, pressing you into your own skin. Delirium thins the ink, the fever recedes, and just for that moment there is clarity. Before the flowers explode, and finally that high, that sense of satisfaction in the joyful ache of shoulder blades that waits until the purpled ink is dry.
Oh, that's very nice.
Thank you.
I like how it's a passionate dance between the hand again and
Yes,
the pen.
exactly.
Yes, the hand. You
So
did,
these
yeah.
two are actually taken from What Hands Can Hold.
Oh, yeah, but you didn't mention hands. But I
Yes,
can
yes.
feel it.
I know you
Very
can
vivid.
feel it.
Lovely.
So the next one is called Papyrus, and that's the call of the paper to the writer. Tall fraying fronds wave on swelling river banks. Imhotep decrees elaborate ceremonies to appease the gods. Sun god Ra hammers stone to red gold sands, which coalesce at the feet of pyramids in Ptolemaic precision. The ibis stalks wild kingdom with spindly legs, fanning black and white plumage under the shade of a fig palm. Born of primeval waters, a blue lotus erupts from circles of chaos. A Nubian scripts a story with ink as dark as coal. It pools around as I rise naked, dripping from long-stemmed reeds. Your glyph scorches my skin like the sting of an asp. My hot eyes are all that are left. In my mouth, you taste the Nile. I will absorb your passion and still be hungry for more. I am your Cleopatra.
Wow. That's another wonderful image with a
Yeah,
bird.
of
right,
how
in
the
in
paper
color.
feels,
Yes, like
how that lure. It's so alluring for the
Yes.
writer to have that page that
Yes.
he just wants to grab it and write on it.
Yes.
So yeah,
Has
that's
a,
the.
in this like a spell. There's something very
I think all artists feel
incantation.
that. Every
Yeah.
artist wants to create something. So the act of creation is something that's very compelling.
Yes, you mentioned lotus. Is the lotus eye
Oh,
a
yes.
memoir you're working on? Can
Yes,
you
it
tell us
is
about
indeed.
that too?
I'm actually working on a memoir for my parents. And their last name is Kamal, which in Hindi means lotus.
Oh, that's where they
So
come
that's where it comes from. And for me, this has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life because most of us see our parents as parents, right? You don't think of them as people when they were young or their own lives and their hopes and their desires and stuff like that. So it has been very interesting. I've been interviewing my parents, and I felt like I was kind of traveling with them incognito and listening to their conversations and watching them as young people. And I felt such a sense of tenderness for them. Like I got to know them as two completely different people. And it was really fascinating.
And you mentioned in the blue door a blue lotus. Is there something that indicates the lotus, the blue? I mean, is there
I
some
think, in certain, like
mythology?
in mythology and Buddhism, each color of the lotus represents a certain
Quality of it, right?
quality. And, blue lotus, I think, represents the intellectual quality. And I think a pink lotus is representational of the Buddha, or I'm not really sure, so don't quote me, but there are definitely certain colors that are associated with specific ideas.
Yes.
I just think it's a beautiful flower because it sort of grows from a marsh,
Yes, yes.
and yet it rises above. So in Hinduism, they think of it as a person who strives to think in a noble and a decent sense, even when surrounded by a lot of evil and bad things.
True.
So
true.
it kind of is a metaphor for a good life.
Right, in the image for Chinese as well. And
Exactly.
Recently, I saw some
Yeah.
Chinese temples, and they also mentioned the symbol of lotus
Yes.
as a like a uncorrupted official.
Exactly,
right? And that
exactly,
despite
exactly.
his peers
True.
maybe maybe corrupt, like he
I
must
think
say.
ancient Egypt also had
As a
the lotus as one
symbol.
of their
Yes.
symbols. So I think a number of cultures
Realize
sort
that
of,
yeah,
thought highly of a lotus. Yeah.
well, thank you, Ami, for being on the program. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been such an honor. Thank you so much for inviting me to your show.
And thank you for joining us, and see us next time on Off the Shelf.